Millionaire abandoned his wife, and 15 years later he sees her at the mall with twins who look the late 1970s in suburban Ohio. Think split-level houses with neatly trimmed lawns, the scent of freshly brewed coffee permeating the air on Saturday mornings, and the gentle hum of cicadas on warm summer evenings. This was the world Charles Bennett and Linda McKinley grew up in, a world of comfortable, predictable routines and shared American dreams. Charles, a young man with a shock of sandy brown hair and eyes that held both ambition and a hint of insecurity, worked as a junior accountant at a local manufacturing firm. He was sharp, quick with numbers, and possessed a relentless drive to climb the corporate ladder. Linda, with her cascade of auburn hair, kind, hazel eyes, and a smile that could light up a room, was a kindergarten teacher at the local elementary school. She adored children, nurturing their young minds with patience and a genuine love for learning. They met at a church social, a quintessential small-town American event. Charles, usually awkward around women, found himself drawn to Linda's warmth and easy laughter. Linda, in turn, was captivated by Charles's earnestness and the underlying vulnerability he tried so hard to conceal. Their courtship was a whirlwind of drive-in movies, picnics in the park, and long conversations about their hopes and futures. They married young, fueled by a youthful optimism and a shared belief in the American dream. Their first apartment was small, a cozy two-bedroom unit in a quiet neighborhood. Charles worked long hours, often staying late at the office, poring over spreadsheets and financial reports. Linda decorated their home with handmade crafts and filled it with the aroma of freshly baked bread. They were happy in that simple, uncomplicated way of young love. But the seeds of discontent were already being sown. Charles, surrounded by ambitious colleagues and the constant pressure to get ahead, began to feel the weight of his modest circumstances. He saw the bigger houses, the newer cars, the expensive vacations his superiors enjoyed, and a gnawing dissatisfaction began to grow within him. He started to see his life with Linda, their comfortable routine, as a constraint, a barrier to the success he craved. "Linda, I'm not meant for this," he confessed one evening, his voice tight with frustration. They were sitting on their small, worn sofa, the flickering light of the television casting shadows on their faces. "I see these guys at work, they're making deals, traveling, living a life. And here I am, stuck in this dead-end job." Linda, ever the pragmatist, tried to reason with him. "Charles, we're happy. We have each other. We have a good life. But it's not enough," he insisted, his voice rising. "I want more. I need more. I want to be somebody, Linda. I want to be respected, admired. I want to have the things I deserve." His words, though not intentionally cruel, stung Linda deeply. She had always believed that their love, their shared values, were enough. She didn't need a mansion or a fancy car. She needed Charles, the man she had fallen in love with, the man who had promised her forever. The arguments became more frequent, more intense. Charles became increasingly withdrawn, spending even longer hours at the office, seeking solace in the world of business and finance. He began to attend networking events, rubbing shoulders with wealthy, influential people, further fueling his ambition and his dissatisfaction with his current life. One particularly heated argument ended with Charles storming out of the apartment, slamming the door behind him. Linda sat alone in the silence, tears streaming down her face, feeling the foundation of their marriage crumbling beneath her. The next morning, Charles was gone. He left a note, short and to the point, devoid of any real emotion. "Linda, I can't do this anymore. I need to find my own path to achieve the success I know I'm capable of. I'm sorry. Charles." Linda read the note over and over, her mind struggling to comprehend the reality of his abandonment. The world she knew, the future she had envisioned, had shattered in an instant. She was alone, heartbroken, and utterly lost. The scent of his aftershave still lingered in the air, a cruel reminder of the man who had promised her forever, only to disappear in pursuit of a golden promise that had already begun to tarnish. The comfortable routine of their life, the shared dreams, the simple joys, all gone, replaced by a gaping void of uncertainty and pain. The American dream, for Linda, had become a nightmare. Charles's path led him to the bustling metropolis of Chicago, Illinois. The city, with its towering skyscrapers and relentless energy, was a stark contrast to the quiet, tree-lined streets of his Ohio hometown. He embraced the change, immersing himself in the world of high finance, driven by a burning ambition to prove himself. He started as a low-level analyst at a prestigious investment firm, working grueling hours, absorbing everything he could about the intricacies of the market. He was ruthless, competitive, and willing to do whatever it took to get ahead. He quickly learned the language of Wall Street, the art of the deal, the subtle dance of power and influence. He climbed the corporate ladder with astonishing speed. His natural aptitude for numbers, combined with his relentless work ethic and his willingness to take risks, made him a rising star. He moved from analyst to associate, then to vice president, and finally to a partner in the firm. He made a fortune, amassing the wealth and status he had always craved. He lived in a luxurious penthouse overlooking Lake Michigan, drove a sleek sports car, and wore tailored suits. He dined at the finest restaurants, attended exclusive parties, and surrounded himself with the trappings of success. He had achieved the American dream, at least on the surface. But beneath the veneer of wealth and power, Charles carried a deep, gnawing guilt. He rarely allowed himself to think about Linda, about the life he had abandoned, about the pain he had caused. When memories of their past surfaced, he quickly suppressed them, burying them under layers of work and ambition. He told himself that he had made the right decision, that he was better off, that Linda was better off without him. But the truth, the uncomfortable reality he refused to acknowledge, was that he had sacrificed his happiness, his integrity, for the sake of material gain. Meanwhile, back in Ohio, Linda was building a new life for herself and her children. The discovery of her pregnancy, just weeks after Charles's departure, had been a shock, a mixture of joy and overwhelming fear. She had considered all her options, but ultimately, she knew she could never give up her children. She moved back in with her parents, who provided her with unwavering support and love. Her father, a retired carpenter with calloused hands and a gentle heart, helped her convert the attic into a small apartment. Her mother, a retired nurse with a calming presence and endless patience, helped her care for the twins, a boy and a girl, whom she named Ethan and Emily. Linda returned to teaching, juggling the demands of motherhood with the responsibilities of her job. It was exhausting, challenging, but also incredibly rewarding. She poured all her love and energy into her children, determined to give them the best possible life, despite the absence of their father. The twins were a constant source of joy. Ethan, with his sandy brown hair and inquisitive eyes, resembled Charles in a way that both pained and comforted Linda. Emily, with her auburn curls and a mischievous smile, inherited Linda's warmth and her love for learning. Linda never spoke ill of Charles to her children. When they asked about their father, she simply told them that he had gone away for work and that he loved them very much, a carefully constructed half-truth that she hoped would protect them from the pain of his abandonment. She built a strong support network of friends, family, and fellow teachers. They rallied around her, offering practical help, emotional support, and a sense of community. She learned to rely on herself, to be both mother and father to her children, to navigate the challenges of single parenthood with grace and resilience. She never remarried. The wounds of Charles's betrayal ran deep, and she found it difficult to trust anyone again. She focused on her children, her career, and her community, finding fulfillment in the simple, everyday joys of life. She had built a good life, a stable life, a life filled with love and purpose, despite the gaping hole that Charles had left behind. The silent years stretched on, marked by the contrasting trajectories of two lives forever altered by a single, fateful decision. The American dream, for Linda, had taken on a new meaning, one defined by resilience, love, and the unwavering strength of a single mother. 15 years. 15 years of separate lives, separate journeys, separate realities. Then, a chance encounter, a collision of past and present, in the most mundane of settings. The sprawling, brightly lit expanse of the Oakwood Mall, a quintessential American shopping center just outside of Columbus, Ohio. Charles, now in his early 40s, was back in Ohio for a business conference. He had a few hours to spare before his flight back to Chicago, and he decided to visit the mall, a place he hadn't been to since his youth. He was looking for a gift for his secretary, a small token of appreciation for her hard work. He walked through the crowded corridors, the air filled with the cacophony of shoppers, the scent of cinnamon pretzels, and the generic pop music blaring from the overhead speakers. Linda, now also in her early 40s, was at the mall with Ethan and Emily, who were now 14 years old. It was a Saturday afternoon, and they were shopping for new school clothes. The twins, on the cusp of adolescence, were a whirlwind of energy, their bickering and laughter echoing through the mall. Charles, lost in thought, rounded a corner and nearly collided with a young boy with sandy brown hair and startlingly familiar eyes. He stopped abruptly, his heart pounding in his chest. He looked up and saw Linda. Time seemed to freeze. The bustling mall, the crowds of shoppers, the noise, all faded into the background. It was just Charles and Linda, staring at each other across a chasm of 15 years. Linda's face registered a mixture of shock, disbelief, and a flicker of something he couldn't quite decipher. Perhaps anger, perhaps sadness, perhaps a strange mixture of both. Her auburn hair was streaked with a few strands of silver, and there were fine lines around her eyes. But she was still beautiful, still possessed that same radiant smile, though it was now tinged with a hint of weariness. The twins, sensing the tension, stopped their bickering and looked from their mother to the strange man who was staring at them with such intensity. Ethan, with his uncanny resemblance to a young Charles, narrowed his eyes, a protective instinct kicking in. Emily, ever the curious one, tilted her head, studying Charles with a mixture of apprehension and fascination. "Charles," Linda finally spoke, her voice barely above a whisper, as if she couldn't quite believe her eyes. "Linda," he replied, his voice hoarse, his throat tight with emotion. An awkward silence hung in the air, punctuated only by the background noise of the mall. Charles struggled to find the words, his mind racing, his heart aching with a mixture of regret, guilt, and a strange, unexpected surge of longing. These are your children?" he finally managed to ask, gesturing towards the twins. Linda nodded, her eyes fixed on his. "Ethan and Emily," she said, her voice regaining some of its strength. They're 14. The realization hit Charles like a physical blow. 14. He had missed their entire lives. He had missed their first steps, their first words, their first day of school, all the milestones, all the precious moments that made up a childhood. He looked at Ethan, at the boy who was the spitting image of him at that age, and a wave of overwhelming emotion washed over him. He saw his own features, his own mannerisms, reflected in this young man he had never known. He looked at Emily, with her mother's radiant smile and her bright, inquisitive eyes, and felt a pang of regret so profound it almost brought him to his knees. They look just like... He stammered, unable to finish the sentence. "Like you," Linda finished for him, her voice devoid of any trace of bitterness. "I found out I was pregnant a few weeks after you left." The words hung in the air, heavy with unspoken accusations, with the weight of 15 years of silence. Charles felt the blood drain from his face. He had known, deep down, that there was a possibility, but he had never allowed himself to fully consider the consequences of his actions. He knelt down, his expensive suit brushing against the polished floor of the mall, his eyes level with the twins. I'm your father," he said, his voice trembling. Ethan and Emily exchanged a look of bewilderment and suspicion. They had grown up without a father, had learned to accept his absence as a fact of life. This sudden appearance, this stranger claiming to be their father, was both confusing and unsettling. Linda, seeing the discomfort on her children's faces, stepped forward. She placed a reassuring hand on each of their shoulders. "It's okay," she said softly. It's a long story." Charles looked up at Linda, his eyes pleading for forgiveness, for understanding. "Linda, I'm so sorry," he whispered, his voice choked with emotion. "I was a fool. I was selfish. Linda cut him off with a gentle smile, a smile that held no trace of anger, only a quiet, weary resignation. "They don't need a father like you, Charles," she said, her voice firm but not unkind. The words, though softly spoken, hit Charles with the force of a physical blow. He felt a sharp, stinging pain in his chest, a pain far greater than any he had ever experienced in his ruthless climb to the top of the corporate ladder. He slowly rose to his feet, his legs feeling weak and unsteady. He looked at Linda, at his children, at the life he had missed, the life he could never reclaim. "I understand," he said, his voice barely audible. He turned and walked away, disappearing into the crowd of shoppers, leaving Linda and the twins standing there, watching him go. Tears streamed down his face, tears of regret, tears of remorse, tears for the life he had thrown away, for the family he had never known. The golden promise, the ambition that had driven him for so long, now seemed hollow and meaningless. He had achieved everything he had ever wanted, and yet he had nothing. The flight back to Chicago was a blur. Charles sat by the window, staring out at the clouds, his mind a maelstrom of emotions. The image of Linda, of Ethan and Emily, was seared into his memory. He replayed the encounter in his mind, over and over, each time the pain of regret intensified. He had spent 15 years building a wall around his heart, convincing himself that he had made the right decision, that he was better off alone, focused on his career. Now, that wall had crumbled, revealing the emptiness that lay beneath. He thought about Linda, about her strength, her resilience, her ability to raise 2 children on her own, to build a good life for them despite his absence. He had underestimated her, had dismissed her as a small-town girl, a simple teacher, not worthy of his ambition. He realized now that she was far stronger, far more courageous than he had ever been. He thought about Ethan and Emily, about the children he had never known, the children who bore his features, his mannerisms, but who were strangers to him. He had missed their entire lives, missed all the joys, all the challenges, all the precious moments that made up a family. He thought about his own life, his career, his wealth, his status. He had achieved everything he had ever set out to achieve, and yet he felt profoundly empty. He had sacrificed his personal life, his relationships, his happiness for the sake of material gain. He had climbed to the top of the corporate ladder, only to find that he was standing on a lonely, isolated peak with nothing but the cold wind of regret for company. Back in his Chicago penthouse, the opulent surroundings, once a source of pride, now felt suffocating. The panoramic view of Lake Michigan, the expensive artwork, the designer furniture, it all seemed meaningless, a hollow shell of a life. He poured himself a glass of scotch, the amber liquid sloshing in the crystal tumbler, and sat down in his leather armchair, staring out at the city lights. He thought about his parents, good, honest people who had instilled in him the values of hard work, integrity, and family. He had betrayed those values, had abandoned his wife and children in pursuit of his own selfish ambitions. He wondered what they would think of him now if they knew the truth. The thought filled him with shame. He picked up the phone, intending to call Linda, to apologize again, to beg for forgiveness. But he hesitated, his finger hovering over the keypad. What could he say? What right did he have to intrude on their lives, to disrupt the peace and stability she had so carefully built? He had made his choice 15 years ago, and he had to live with the consequences. He put the phone down, the weight of his regret pressing down on him. He realized that he couldn't undo the past, couldn't erase the pain he had caused. But he could, perhaps, try to make amends, to find a way to support his children, to be a part of their lives, even if it was from a distance. He spent the next few days in a state of near paralysis, consumed by guilt and remorse. He neglected his work, ignored his calls, and barely ate. His carefully constructed world, the world of power and success, seemed to be crumbling around him. Finally, he forced himself to take action. He couldn't wallow in self-pity forever. He had to find a way to move forward, to make some kind of positive contribution to the lives of his children. He started by researching Linda's life, using the resources available to him through his business connections. He discovered that she was still teaching at the same elementary school, that she owned a modest house in a quiet neighborhood, that she was actively involved in her community. He learned about Ethan's passion for baseball and Emily's talent for art. He learned about their friends, their schools, their activities. He felt a pang of jealousy, a longing to be a part of their world, but he knew that he couldn't simply insert himself into their lives. He had to find a way to support them anonymously, to provide for them without disrupting their lives or causing them further pain. He decided to set up a trust fund for the twins, a substantial sum of money that would provide for their education, their future, their well-being. He contacted his lawyer, a discreet and trustworthy man, and instructed him to establish the trust anonymously, ensuring that Linda and the children would never know the source of the funds. It was a small gesture, a drop in the ocean compared to the years of absence, the years of missed opportunities. But it was a start. It was a way for Charles to begin to atone for his past, to find some measure of redemption in the wreckage of his life. He knew it wouldn't be enough, that it wouldn't erase the pain he had caused, but it was all he could do. He had to try. The reflections and regrets had forced him to confront the reality of his choices, and now he was determined to find a way, however small, to make amends. The encounter at the mall had shaken Linda to her core. Seeing Charles after all those years, seeing the resemblance between him and Ethan, had brought back a flood of memories, a mixture of pain, anger, and a lingering sadness that she had tried so hard to bury. She had spent years building a wall around her heart, protecting herself and her children from the hurt of his abandonment. She had convinced herself that she was better off without him, that she didn't need him, that her children didn't need him. But seeing him, hearing his apology, had stirred up emotions she thought she had long since conquered. She had driven home in silence, the twins unusually quiet in the back seat, sensing the weight of the unspoken emotions. She had tucked them into bed, kissed them goodnight, and then sat alone in her living room, staring out at the darkened street. She thought about the early years of their marriage, the happy times, the shared dreams, the simple joys of their life together. She remembered the pain of his departure, the crushing weight of his betrayal, the struggle to rebuild her life, to raise her children alone. She had never hated Charles. She had been hurt, angry, disappointed, but she had never allowed herself to be consumed by bitterness. She had focused on her children, on providing them with a loving, stable home, on building a good life for them. She had found strength in her family, her friends, her community. She had often wondered what had become of him, whether he had found the success he had so desperately craved. She had occasionally seen his name in the business section of the newspaper, read about his rise in the corporate world. She had felt a twinge of something, perhaps resentment, perhaps a strange sense of satisfaction, but she had quickly dismissed it. She had moved on. She had built a new life. Now, seeing him again, seeing the regret in his eyes, she felt a surprising wave of compassion. She saw the pain he was carrying, the burden of his guilt. She saw the man he had become, the man who had achieved everything he had ever wanted, and yet who seemed so profoundly unhappy. She didn't regret her decision to tell him that the children didn't need him. It was the truth, at least in the way she meant it. They didn't need a father who had abandoned them, who had prioritized his own ambition over their well-being. They had a good life, a stable life, a life filled with love and support. But she also knew that the twins were curious about their father, that they had questions that she couldn't fully answer. She had always tried to be honest with them, to protect them from the pain of his abandonment, but she knew that they deserved to know the truth, to have the opportunity to form their own opinions. She decided to talk to them, to explain the situation in a way that they could understand, to give them the space to express their feelings, their questions, their concerns. The next morning, she sat down with Ethan and Emily at the kitchen table. She told them the story of her marriage to Charles, of his ambition, of his decision to leave. She told them about the early years, the struggles, the joys, the challenges. She spoke calmly, honestly, without any trace of bitterness or resentment. She wanted them to understand the situation, to see both sides of the story, to form their own judgments. Ethan, ever the protector, was angry. He couldn't understand how his father could have abandoned them, how he could have chosen his career over his family. He felt a sense of betrayal, a sense of rejection. Emily, ever the inquisitive one, was more curious. She wanted to know more about Charles, about his life, about his reasons for leaving. She felt a mixture of sadness, confusion, and a strange, unexpected longing to connect with the man who was her father. Linda listened to their reactions, their questions, their concerns. She answered their questions as honestly as she could, providing them with the information they needed to process this new, unexpected reality. She reassured them that they were loved, that they were valued, that they had a good life, a stable life, a life filled with love and support. She told them that it was okay to feel confused, to feel angry, to feel sad. She told them that it was their decision whether or not to have any contact with Charles, that she would support them whatever they decided. Linda's perspective was one of strength, resilience, and a deep, unwavering love for her children. She had been hurt, betrayed, abandoned, but she had risen above the pain, had built a good life for herself and her children. She had protected them, nurtured them, and given them the foundation they needed to thrive. She was a mother, first and foremost, and her priority was their well-being, their happiness, their future. She had faced the ghost of her past, and, in doing so, had reaffirmed her commitment to the present and the future she had built for her family. Charles's efforts to provide for his children anonymously were met with both success and frustration. The trust fund was established without a hitch, the lawyer ensuring that all legal and financial details were handled with utmost discretion. Charles received regular updates on the fund's performance, but he had no way of knowing how the money was being used, how it was impacting the lives of Ethan and Emily. He longed to know more, to see them, to talk to them, but he resisted the urge to intrude on their lives. He knew that any direct contact would likely cause more harm than good, that it would disrupt the peace and stability Linda had so carefully built. He channeled his energy into his work, but his heart wasn't in it. He found himself increasingly disillusioned with the world of high finance, with the cutthroat competition, the relentless pursuit of wealth. He had achieved everything he had ever wanted, and yet he felt emptier than ever. He started to make changes in his life, small changes at first, then more significant ones. He began to donate a portion of his income to charities, focusing on organizations that supported single mothers and children in need. He volunteered his time at a local homeless shelter, serving meals and interacting with people from all walks of life. He started to reconnect with his own values, the values he had abandoned in his pursuit of success. He realized that true happiness didn't come from wealth or status, but from human connection, from making a positive difference in the world, from living a life of purpose and meaning. He continued to follow Linda and the twins from a distance, using his resources to gather information about their lives. He learned about Ethan's success on the baseball team, about Emily's award-winning artwork, about their academic achievements. He felt a mixture of pride and regret, a longing to be a part of their triumphs, to share in their joys. One day, he received an anonymous letter, a simple thank you note written in a child's handwriting. "Dear whoever you are, thank you for the money. My mom says it's for college. I'm going to use it to study engineering. I want to build things that help people. Sincerely, Ethan." The letter brought tears to Charles's eyes. It was the first direct contact he had had with his children, even if it was anonymous. He felt a surge of hope, a glimmer of connection. He realized that even though he couldn't be a traditional father to them, he could still make a difference in their lives, even from afar. He framed the letter and placed it on his desk, a constant reminder of the children he had never known, the children he was now silently supporting. It was a symbol of his redemption, a tangible sign that he was, perhaps, beginning to make amends for the mistakes of his past. The silent support was a challenging, frustrating, but ultimately rewarding path for Charles. He had to accept the limitations of his role, the distance he had to maintain, the lack of direct connection. But he found solace in the knowledge that he was making a positive contribution to the lives of his children, that he was helping them to achieve their dreams, to build a better future. He was, in his own way, becoming the father he should have been 15 years ago. The truth, like a persistent weed, eventually finds its way to the surface. Despite Linda's and Charles's efforts to maintain a careful distance, the twins, now approaching their 18th birthday, began to piece together the puzzle of their father's existence. It started with small things. Ethan, while cleaning out the attic, stumbled upon a box of old photographs. Among them were pictures of Linda and a young man with sandy brown hair and familiar eyes, Charles. Ethan recognized the resemblance instantly. Emily, always the more perceptive of the two, had noticed the subtle changes in her mother's demeanor after the encounter at the mall. She had also noticed the regular arrival of financial statements for a trust fund she and Ethan were beneficiaries of, a fund with no clear source. They confronted Linda, presenting her with the photographs and the financial documents. Linda, realizing that the truth could no longer be concealed, sat them down and told them the full story from beginning to end. She recounted her early life with Charles, his ambition, his departure, her pregnancy, her struggles, and her eventual rebuilding of their lives. She also revealed Charles's anonymous support, the trust fund, and his silent presence in their lives. The twins' reactions were complex and varied. Ethan initially was furious. He felt betrayed by both his parents, by his father for abandoning them, and by his mother for concealing the truth for so long. He struggled to reconcile the image of the successful businessman with the man who had walked out on his family. Emily, while also hurt and confused, was more understanding. She saw the pain in her mother's eyes, the regret in Charles's actions. She felt a flicker of curiosity about her father, a desire to understand his motivations, his choices. They spent hours talking, arguing, questioning, processing the information. They grappled with conflicting emotions, anger, resentment, curiosity, and a strange, unexpected longing for connection. Ethan, fueled by anger and a sense of injustice, decided to confront Charles. He used the information from the trust fund documents to track down Charles's address in Chicago. He took a bus, a journey of several hours, driven by a need to express his feelings, to demand answers. Emily, more cautious and contemplative, decided to write a letter. She poured her thoughts and feelings onto paper, expressing her confusion, her hurt, her curiosity, and her desire to understand. She mailed the letter to Charles's address, unsure of what response, if any, she would receive. The children's discovery had shattered the carefully constructed wall of separation between Charles and his family. The silent support, the anonymous gestures, were no longer enough. The truth was out, and the consequences, both intended and unintended, were about to unfold. The stage was set for a confrontation, a reckoning, a potential resolution, or perhaps a further fracturing of an already fragile family dynamic. The American dream, for this family, was about to be redefined, reshaped by the forces of truth, forgiveness, and the enduring power of familial bonds, however strained. Part 8. Reconciliation or Resolution. Ethan's arrival at Charles's Chicago penthouse was unannounced. He stood in the opulent lobby, feeling a mixture of anger, resentment, and a strange sense of awe. He had never seen such wealth, such luxury. It was a world away from his modest upbringing in suburban Ohio. Charles, alerted by the doorman, came down to meet him. He recognized Ethan instantly. The resemblance to his younger self was undeniable. He felt a surge of emotions, guilt, shame, fear, and a flicker of hope. "Ethan," he said, his voice trembling. What were you doing here? Ethan, his face hardened with anger, confronted him directly. I know who you are, he said, his voice tight with emotion. I know everything. About the trust fund, about abandoning us, about everything. Charles, unable to meet his son's gaze, lowered his head. I'm sorry, he stammered. I know I can't undo the past, but sorry isn't good enough. Ethan interrupted, his voice rising. You walked out on us. You left my mom to raise us alone. You missed our entire lives. And now you think you can just buy your way back in with some money. Charles flinched at the harshness of Ethan's words. He knew he deserved them. He had no defense. I know it's not enough, he said quietly. I know I can't make up for what I did, but I want to try. I want to be a part of your life, if you'll let me. Ethan scoffed. You want to be a part of my life? After 18 years? You don't even know me. I know, Charles admitted, but I want to get to know you. I wanted to know both of you. I want to be the father I should have been. Their conversation was raw, emotional, filled with accusations, recriminations, and a glimmer of hope. Ethan vented his anger, his frustration, his sense of betrayal. Charles listened, apologized, and expressed his deep regret. Meanwhile, in Ohio, Linda received a phone call from Charles. He told her about Ethan's visit, about their conversation. Linda was initially panicked, fearing that the confrontation would further damage the already fragile relationship between Charles and his children. But Charles reassured her, telling her that he was handling it, that he was trying to build a bridge with Ethan. A few days later, Emily received a reply to her letter. It was a long, handwritten letter from Charles, pouring out his heart, his regrets, his hopes for the future. He acknowledged his mistakes, apologized for his actions, and expressed his deep love for his children. Emily, moved by his words, decided to give him a chance. She called him, and they talked for hours. She asked him questions, shared her thoughts and feelings, and began to understand his perspective, his motivations, his flaws. Over the next few months, a tentative reconciliation began to take place. Ethan, initially resistant, slowly began to soften his stance. He saw Charles's genuine remorse, his commitment to making amends. He realized that holding on to his anger was only hurting himself. Emily, more open from the beginning, embraced the opportunity to connect with her father. She visited him in Chicago, spent time with him, and began to build a relationship based on mutual respect and understanding. Linda, while initially apprehensive, gradually accepted Charles's presence in their lives. She saw the positive impact he was having on the twins, the sense of closure and healing that was taking place. She realized that forgiveness was not about condoning his past actions, but about releasing the burden of anger and resentment, about moving forward, about creating a new, more complete family dynamic. The reconciliation was not easy. There were still awkward moments, unresolved issues, and lingering pain. But there was also a growing sense of connection, a willingness to forgive, a desire to build a new future. Charles moved back to Ohio, taking a less demanding job, prioritizing his family over his career. He spent time with Ethan and Emily, attending their school events, helping them with their college applications, and simply being present in their lives. He and Linda never rekindled their romantic relationship, but they developed a respectful, even friendly, co-parenting dynamic. They learned to communicate effectively, to work together for the well-being of their children. The twins, now young adults, navigated the complexities of their newly expanded family with grace and maturity. They learned to accept Charles, not as a replacement for the father they never had, but as a flawed, imperfect human being who was trying to make amends, to be a positive presence in their lives. The ending wasn't a fairy tale, a perfect happily ever after. It was a realistic, nuanced resolution, a testament to the enduring power of forgiveness, the resilience of the human spirit, and the complex, often messy, reality of family relationships. The American dream for this family had been shattered, rebuilt, and redefined. It wasn't about wealth, success, or material possessions. It was about love, forgiveness, connection, and the enduring bonds that tie a family together, even after years of separation and pain. It was about finding redemption in the wreckage of past mistakes, about building a new future, not perfect, but filled with hope, healing, and a renewed sense of belonging. They even started a new tradition, a family dinner every Sunday. Charles, who had once only cared for the finest restaurants, learned to cook, often making simple, home-cooked meals that everyone enjoyed. Linda, Ethan, and Emily would gather around the table, sharing stories, laughter, and the quiet comfort of being together. These dinners were not just about the food. They were a symbol of their reconciliation, a tangible representation of the family they had rebuilt, a testament to the enduring power of second chances. It was a far cry from the opulent penthouse and the lonely meals Charles had once consumed, and it was infinitely more satisfying. The cicadas still hummed on warm Ohio evenings, but now, for Charles, they sang a song of redemption, a melody of a family found, not lost.